We'll do a bunch of stuff.
So can you give me...
I love that tune.
Well, I forgot to leave my picture up instead of my face, but this is a professional podcast with professional people who do professional things. And one of those professional people is me, the Field, also known as Field of Bears, here to remind you that socialism always ends in starvation and genocide. And since it is Saturday, you do know that I shall have a guest on tonight to talk about various things. The enigmatic, mysterious Minuteman Bear, who, despite being a filthy lobsterback, is quite the interesting fellow, and shall be talking about how the Foggy Island has all sorts of things that are right and wrong with it. Why don't you go ahead and unmute yourself and say hello?
Hi, I'm Minuteman Bear. I've done a couple of other podcasts before. A few of you, you'll know me from the chat and things. Just here to talk about a few things, including English common law, which is quite an interesting subject.
Yeah. So I'm going to skip all the hellos because apart from B West and Thor Davy and Base Texan, I can't remember everybody. Sorry. I don't feel like scrolling up and ruining the conversation. And so one of the things that I listen to several British people because I'm interested in the Anglosphere, and I'm interested in the EU and all that, and I have tremendous respect for the British roots of American philosophy and jurisprudence and all that. And so one of the things I hear from some of the British people that I listen to about their own country is the unwritten constitution. And I'm not really clear on what that is. So why don't you just give us a little bit of rundown?
Well, the unwritten constitution doesn't really exist anymore, which is kind of the problem. Because it's not been written down, it's not technically legally binding in a lot of ways. And it's changed over time. One of the main things, which we don't have anymore, is we used to have castle doctrine, self-defense.
Yeah.
For your home. So you're allowed to, protect yourself with firearms or swords.
Yes, I do actually remember what that started as is a lord in his castle is able to defend it however he pleases. And so there was a magistrate. Was that a barrister case? Well, anyway, a very high case in common law where it says, well, a man's home if it's freely held, if he's a free man and he's on his own land, that is his castle, whether he's a lord or not.
Yeah, that's very true. And it's always been very common in English history to have swords and firearms. We had loads of firearms around late in the Victorian era, and there was very few shootings really, and police weren't armed.
Well, yeah,
This
every
was back when everyone
household,
had guns.
yeah, every man of fighting age was required to own an arming sword and a longbow in England for a long time.
Mm.
Like, not only free to own, required.
Mm. Yeah, England has a very long and bloody history of fighting with itself, basically, and well, fighting within the UK and as well as other countries. Been vast numbers of civil uprisings, and there's a civil war and lots of rebellions. So yeah,
Yeah,
there's been a lot going on. There's very well, it's what Game of Thrones is based on. Well, lots of warring factions for hundreds of years in Britain that would fight each other and fall out and rebellions.
well,
And all
yeah.
sorts.
Well, what is the actual island called? Is it just Britain or is it Brittany?
Just Britain, Great Britain.
So the three major kingdoms that arose were Wales, England, and Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
got
Wales,
Ireland as well.
well, that's a different island.
Mm.
And I think what happened was Wales was subsumed by political marriage. Correct?
I'm not too sure. I know back in the medieval times.
Well, because the Prince of Wales is the sovereign, that's the King of England. Right? So I'm pretty sure it was a political marriage that did that.
But yeah, like Scotland, we were fighting the Welsh for a long time.
Yeah, and
I think we
conquered Scotland eventually.
Wales was first, though. I think in the by the 1400s, there were lots of British castles in Wales that they used to, keep order from and things like that.
Well, a castle in and of itself is a fortified house, basically. And it could be anything from just a Norman keep, that is just basically a very large stone square, to something like Trafalgar Castle, which is highly impressive and imposing, and basically a big walled city.
Yeah, some castles are absolutely fantastic, and you've got a lot of them in England and Wales and Scotland, because back in the medieval times, they were the ultimate symbol of power. If you had uprisings going on, you could put a giant stone castle there, which you can see for miles and miles and miles, and just fill it with a garrison of soldiers, which can be deployed at any time to stamp out rowdy crowds and things like that. And they were often.
Well, it's not only that. If it turns out that the local people happen to like the way you governed them, then the big stone house with a nice stone wall all the way around it with battlements turns out to be a very nice place to run when raiders or bandits or other ne'er-do-wells come along to try and steal their things.
Yeah, very true, very true.
Or the French.
They tried and failed.
Well, and so the unwritten constitution is basically just like I would suppose, sort of a set of philosophical axioms that the British people sort of had their jurisprudence revolve around. Then, this is what Britain is, therefore we shouldn't violate the sort of idea of Britain when we do legal cases.
Yeah, it's a very cultural thing. It's basically a cultural acknowledgement of human rights, and that was it wasn't written down, but everyone was for a while rather intent on withholding it. It doesn't necessarily mean that trials in particularly the medieval times were especially fair. There's some really horrible torture methods that they used to force confessions and things like that. But
Oh
there's
yeah,
always
that's
been,
another
at least
interesting thing
you
is
had to get a trial. You had to be put
yeah.
before a jury of
But
people.
the interesting thing is that England was the first European nation to outlaw confessions extracted by torture. And I think that's very important because
Yeah.
the rest of Europe thought that you couldn't trust a peasant or commoner unless he'd been tortured first.
Mm. Yeah, there were some really nasty execution methods as well.
Yes, I watch Mad Lads, but that was in Belgium. That guy.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was England and probably Scotland and Wales practiced drawn and quartering, beheading, and the crow's cage for a long time as well.
Mm.
And the crow's cage was particularly awful because you go into it alive and basically just die of thirst or sun exposure.
Mm. Yeah, and you're left there with a public warning. For anyone that doesn't know, it's just kind of a small human-sized metal cage. It's a box that they'd put you in.
But and the reason they called it crow's cage is because it held the food for the crows, not because the crows went inside it.
Yeah. But yeah, there's a particularly nasty one called crushing as well, which is you'd get a small stone about the size of your hand and put it under your spine and put a wooden board on top of you and pile it full of weights until your spine snapped. There's records of it taking like 15 minutes to die. Really horrible stuff. But they, since the French invaded, since the Normans invaded, they brought with them the castles and the rule of law. Even though they were particularly fierce, there were uprisings, and on his deathbed, he said, "Yeah, we were definitely too harsh on them. They killed the equivalent of like maybe an eighth of the population in repayment for an uprising."
Yeah, that's definitely harsh. Now, I guess a lot of just like the Saxon migration plus then the Norman invasion sort of created a conflicting culture of two separate kinds of people. Where in the rest of Europe that resulted in a really stagnant aristocracy, like in Spain or Portugal or the Netherlands, where there was just this stratified sort of group of people who owned all the land, gathered all the wealth, and lived by their own set of rules. And then beneath them were the productive classes who they were meant to sort of guide and shepherd and protect, but often just crushed and robbed and did other horrible things too. And you might have noticed I didn't mention France, and that's because they're a pretend people from a pretend place.
Ah, the frogs.
Yes. Pretending like they're people, I know. It's all very sad. But in England, but in Britain, and I don't know the history of the island next to you, Ireland, but in Britain, the sort of conflict didn't stop because the Anglos and the Saxons, who eventually intermarried and became the Anglo-Saxons, they didn't really put up with the Normans being that harsh with them. And they refused to just become a peasant sort of class. And you ended up with a whole thing called the yeoman, which didn't really exist anywhere else in Europe, where through military service or excellence or just really honorable sort of conduct, like there were several yeomen who just by helping a noble with their carriage ended up with their own land holdings. It's like, oh, you're a yeoman now. Here's some land. You helped me. And so having this sort of non-peasant non-noble whole group of people who had their own land, who you couldn't just come along and take their stuff. That led to, I think, the ruling class being forced to sort of recognize that, no, these are humans too. Like, they're not just like a lesser being than me. They have just as much of a soul and a will as me, and it's evidenced by the fact that they control their land and holdings with honor and dignity, even though they're smaller than mine.
Mm.
And that's what I think led to things like the castle doctrine and free speech and all of that.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Oh, I had a point. I forgot what it was. Oh well.
Yeah, this is all just sort of historical knowledge off the top of my head as an American about a place I've never been.
No, it's good though. Most English people wouldn't have that amount of knowledge about England.
It's really a shame because England produced concepts like they rediscovered the concept of trial by jury, but they produced free speech and freedom of religion and religious tolerance. Because even though the Puritans were a bit too extreme for England with their whole sola scripta thing and wanting to purge the Church of England of everything that looked, smelled, or sort of sounded halfway Catholic, which is why they ended up getting kicked out, just because they wouldn't shut up. But what people fail to realize is that beside the Church of England, there were several Protestant denominations in the country at the time of the Puritans, as well as Catholic churches, which is, again, one of the problems that the government ended up having with the Puritans, is they wanted the Catholics kicked out of England. They wouldn't do it.
Yeah, England's got a very long history of religious dispute, mainly because of Henry VIII.
The very first Protestant. He wanted a divorce, and the Pope wouldn't give it to him.
Yeah, he was
tired of beheading all of his wives. That's the funniest thing to me is he actually loved this wife, but he'd given up on getting a son out of her. So he didn't want just to convict her of treason like the other four.
Yeah, he was crazy. It's quite a shame, really, because he was quite a promising king at first. He used to be really athletic and things in his younger days, but when he got older,
he had
really tyrannical.
It was it's a part of the whole thing of successive rulers based on your birth, right? You know, he might have been a very good sovereign and a very good leader, but his obsession with having somebody to leave it to led to him to spiral out of control when he continued to not be able to produce a son with a woman. Being at the time, the understanding of how babies are conceived was, shall we say, incomplete. He thought it was perfectly acceptable for him to blame his wives. Oh, and by the way, Slap Weasel pointed out that ne'er-do-well and French are synonymous.
But yeah, England's always been the leading kind of philosophical light, really, in a lot of ways, especially when it comes to.
I suppose as long as it was England, I suppose.
Ended slavery, basically. I mean, obviously slavery hasn't ended; it still exists, but it's illegal. We made a lot of effort in ending slavery.
Well, yeah. Having an institution no longer be recognized by the state is a pretty big deal. And there are several countries in Africa that have recently re-legalized slavery. So, Libya, chiefly among them. Thank you, Hillary.
Yeah.
But actually, it was the same guy who he got the ball rolling on that. He wrote the song "Amazing Grace." I don't remember his name, but he proposed a bill to Parliament, and through a lot of maneuvering and guile, managed to get the non-abolitionist sort of people away from Parliament when the vote and debate were taking place. So he managed to get a ban on the trade of slaves within the empire, so that you couldn't buy or sell. But that's just a really, it just gets the ball rolling on that sort of thing, you know?
Definitely.
Because in America, we actually had something very similar a little bit later, which is probably one of the causes for the Civil War, is we had a ban on buying new slaves from outside. And then the Republicans were moving to ban the buying and selling of slaves, period. And so then plantations would be left with their own populations, and that would quickly become unsustainable because you have isolated populations, and unless you are willing to have 100% Down syndrome, then that's just not going to work. And one thing that Britain did that I think was very heroic is they actually bought people's freedom from the slaveholders.
Yeah, they did a lot of heroic things. We only finished paying the bill in, I think it was in the 1970s.
Oh, for the freedom of slaves within the empire.
Yeah,
but yeah,
much.
Little known thing is that the most expensive region for that was India, not Canada or any of the various Bahama islands that were currently under British rule at the time, because they ended up just buying out all of the deletes from slavery, because the crown basically considered their position as subservient to be the same thing as being slaves. And since various upper castes basically owned them, they just bought their freedom. But I don't know how India works now with the castes. I know that they're still there.
Yeah, they've got a lot of class problems in India, so I don't know much about it. It's got a very long and detailed history, much like England. But
yeah, India has fascinating history as well, but I haven't read into it as much. I guess because I'm not as connected to it. There are some cool sort of martial arts traditions in India, but that's about all I know.
Fair enough.
Yeah. And so with this long sort of philosophical history, and apart from the Magna Carta, nothing really being written down, basically you go off of precedent, which is what a common law country is, right?
Yeah, it was always seen as immoral.
Laurie, that's what the untouchables are called, the deletes. Sorry, I had to just clarify something because
yeah, no worries.
I know two caste names: the Brahmin, that's the top one, and delete, and that's the bottom one. The other, I think 4 or 5, completely escaped me.
Yeah, it's pretty complex. But yeah, so we've always had kind of an unwritten constitution. We did have a Bill of Rights, I think, in 1688, which kind of set a few things into law, but it was more
like a statute.
Yeah, it was more kind of limiting the king's power as opposed to
limiting anyone's power is a good thing.
Yeah, but it wasn't outlining, say, you have the right to this. It wasn't like the Bill of Rights. It was just yeah, it wasn't entirely like that.
The Bill of Rights is 100% negative rights.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
Which is good.
it's a list. It's a list of prohibitions against the government. There are no in the Bill of Rights. There are no duties that the government has to provide to you. None. Just requirements to not interfere.
Yeah, which is brilliant, and it's a very British idea. You know, the colonists took the British moral values and said, "Oh, we can do this without the taxation and the monarchy." Yeah, okay, let's do it.
Yeah. So if you read Thomas Paine's Common Sense, it does sort of destroy the concept of legitimate monarchy. Because the monarchy basically is based off of Plato's sort of soul caliber. I forget what it's called. Where there are gold people, and iron people, clay people, or whatever. It's like the kind of soul that you have. Gold is for rulers, iron is for workers, clay is for slaves.
Interesting.
But it's very platonic. It's not very it's like idealistic, and basing your system off of something that's so idealistic is not very good, as the French have learned repeatedly, and maybe learning again very soon about their whole idealistic democracy.
Yeah.
Democracy as a value is not like democracy is a means, not an end unto itself.
Good point.
And I think that's something that we get from England as well. Is the Parliament, right? It started out as just being lords being able to sort of reject edicts by the king. But again, you had all these free men with land holdings that were like, excuse me, where's my political voice? Why are you deciding to go to war and draft my sons, and I don't get to say anything about it? And then the House of Commons was introduced into the Parliament. And so the democracy in and of itself was basically the ability to give the non-nobility, the common people, the regular guy, a political voice, make decisions about his nation that would affect him, such as taxation, going to war, the immigration, and all of that stuff. And even though it was not universal suffrage, the people who were not born into nobility, they got to, at the very least, have a say over whether or not a certain policy would be implemented that would affect them and other common people as well. So basically it was like the Roman sort of plebeian council.
Yeah, well, kings have always had advisors.
Yes.
They used to have their own councils, and they'd have, 12 or 30 people that they would talk to and they would get advice from. And then we fought a bloody civil war to try and establish a government which would be separate from the monarchy. And
well, in order to,
really,
yeah, exactly. But in order to avoid that again, they had to give regular people a political voice. And that's the whole point of the democracy, is to not be having people make decisions for you. You have to be involved in the making of the decision. Otherwise, you consider yourself to be under a tyranny, and eventually men will find that to be intolerable. And once a condition is intolerable, they shall fight against it with force.
Yeah, that's very true. But yeah, the English Civil War, it's a shame really, because Cromwell, like, even though the making of Parliament is a good thing in my opinion, well, kind of, Cromwell really abused a lot of his power after winning the war. So
Well, yeah, such as
he was a tyrant himself.
outlawing Christmas might have been a bridge too far.
Yeah. But so it's given power from one
You
tyrant
can't
to another.
you cannot take Christmas sausage away from English people. It's just, again, intolerable.
Christmas is great. Imagine banning Christmas. Well, they're trying to get rid of it, aren't they? But that's a whole other topic.
Well, if we get into that, then we might get into a bit of hate speech.
Yeah, potentially.
Yeah.
We'll try and avoid that.
And
like not being in jail.
So the features of common law are, in criminal cases, trial by jury, and precedent matters. Then, right? And so,
yeah,
if you have someone who's convicted of stealing apples, and the punishment was community service for 2 weeks, and then another guy gets convicted of stealing the same amount of apples, and the punishment is to have both of his thumbs cut off and have the word idiot tattooed on his forehead, then that would be like, no, this goes against precedent.
Not necessarily. It was more, the precedent was that there had to be a jury, really. The punishments were very severe for a lot of English history up until the Victorian era. I mean, in the Victorian era, if you stole a loaf of bread, you'd get sent to Australia, So which lots of people died on the voyage, and the conditions there weren't brilliant either.
Well, they have very large spiders in Australia, so that was, the whole war sent to Georgia, by the way, which was also a penal colony. And funny thing is people think of Georgia as a plantation state, but it had the lowest population of African slaves of all the colonies, and the whole reason why is Irish slaves. Because unscrupulous businessmen in Britain would accuse Irishmen of thievery, and the punishment was to be sent to a penal colony. And if they had friends in Georgia...
Yeah, there was a lot of that. We've really not been kind to the Irish, or the Scots, or the Welsh.
Well, funny thing is, the Scots, after their monarchy was exiled and lost to time, became integrated sort of with the rest of the kingdom, and ended up producing some of the finest universities in the world. Were pretty much supreme for about 300 years, and such names as Adam Smith came from Scotland, who, of course, wrote the famous treatise on economics, On the Wealth of Nations.
Scotland has had some brilliant inventors and engineers as well.
Oh yeah, the steam engine as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Nearly forgot about that. As well as, I think, the first combine harvester.
Didn't know about that.
Well, it could have been a Scotsman who came to America, but I'm a bit fuzzy on that one.
There's great poets as well. Great Scottish poets.
Well, suffering does that. Just look at all the great Irish playwrights of the Victorian era as well. Suffering does it to you.
Yeah, that's very true. I think a lot of art, really. I think art is either joy or suffering expressed.
It can be. A lot of sort of English. A lot of
when I'm making music, it's very emotional. It's either portraying something very, very happy, good emotions, or it's very moody.
I agree. As far when English language art, whether it's visual or spoken or written, it often strives to convey emotion and idea at the same time.
Exactly.
And I do consider myself to be an artist when I write a story. And so when I do that, what I want to do is, it's not just give people the sort of film that's in my head. I want them to understand the way that the characters are feeling in the moment and why they're making the choices that they're making. And I read translations of like I read the translations of Don Quixote and the Brothers Karamazov and Crime and Punishment, and you do get some of that, but it's just different, you know. It's something like, they're very good, obviously. They're classics for a reason, but it's not quite the same as even like an Old English Beowulf. Like, you really understand Beowulf when you read the epic.
I think it depends entirely on the culture when the art is made, really.
I think I'm pretty far removed from Bronze Age England.
No, I'm saying the culture is obviously going to have heavy influence on the emotions.
Well, yes, I think you're right. There are some things that I think are universal to humanity, like
Oh yeah, of course.
when you read Crime and Punishment, the Russian names are impronounceable. I won't even try. But the main character you're following, he's committed a murder, and the guilt for the murder that he talked himself into committing eats away at him, and the only thing he can do to sort of keep his sanity is turn himself in eventually. And like, that is very human. Like, from any culture you can connect to it, but maybe you need to be from sort of Eastern Orthodox tradition to really understand how crushing guilt can be for that sort of person.
Definitely. But yeah, I think emotions are the measure of good art. I think that's how people define good art, you know? That's why most
Well,
people
here's where I'm gonna
modern art, because modern art doesn't tend to make people feel anything.
Well, that's all modern art tries to do. It tries to evoke emotions in you without any sort of sense, which is where I'm going to push back. Is good art will evoke emotions from you because it engages your mind.
Yeah.
So,
definitely.
like, a Jackson Pollock painting might make someone feel sort of weird, I guess. I don't know. I look at it and I see paint splattered everywhere, and I start feeling like I need to clean up the mess. But I look at something a little bit more classic, like, I don't know, just photographs of the Sistine Chapel ceiling, and I find myself in awe. And it's because it is God reaching out to man. It's sort of represented visually. So I can't look at that and be compare the two and consider Jackson Pollock anywhere close to Michelangelo.
Very true, very true. It's about the emotions the art instills as well. You know, it should have a meaning.
Well, it has it. Yeah, the emotions are the emotions are evoked because it has meaning, right? And if you go to a different art form, one that's visual and intellectual, they're supposed to be film. You look at something that's received a lot of heat recently, and I think deservedly so, Star Wars The Last Jedi. You're supposed to feel something when Admiral Gender Studies completely breaks the lore surrounding hyperspace and rams her cruiser into like 8 Star Destroyers plus the big wing thing. With a city on top for some reason.
Yeah,
You're in space.
modern
Top can
films
be
are
any direction you want.
incredibly bad.
But see, the whole thing is not only does the scene not make any sense, if you've been paying attention to the film at all, you'll be really happy that Admiral General Studies is finally dead, because every decision she made was backwards and asinine.
Yeah.
But you're
Well,
supposed to feel really sad and like it was a heroic sacrifice. Like look at the pretty lights. Did you not
Yeah.
see the pretty lights on the screen? Also, she's dead now. That's a sacrifice. It's heroic. You're supposed to feel. Come on. And so that's why I got to push back a little bit, you know? It's got, not only does it have to evoke a feeling, like someone in the cinema might
intentional.
genuinely feel emotionally touched by that. But intellectually, I've been watching this character, this whole film, be completely asinine and unnecessarily aggressive toward somebody who we are supposed to like from the previous film, and who is making every decision with the information he has the best possible decision, and he's being constantly just put down upon for it. Talking, of course, about the pilot guy, but Puerto Rican pilot guy, what's his face? It shows you how well I've connected to the new characters. Poe.
Yeah. But yeah, like we need more good films, which is I'm not sure you might have heard, but I'm trying to get together Bear Studios,
which I think is a fantastic idea. Now,
we could all pull it in, like all bears we can get, because if we need anything doing specifically, we can find bears that do it.
We need storytellers, we need actors, we need set designers. Now, when it comes to a live action film, a while ago, my mother was awfully upset. And in order to cheer her up, I decided to make a heroic sacrifice of my own and suffer through a musical. I despise musicals. However, I love my mother and she enjoys them tremendously, especially ones that are not new ones. And this was a classic one that was in the public domain, which meant it was free and available for the local cinema to do a classic movie night with. So I go and I sit down and I watched a musical called The King and I. It is not a story of Esther, which is highly disappointing to me because I happen to really like the story of Esther. But it is actually, surprisingly, an enjoyable film about a school teacher who goes to Siam. And look, just find it somewhere. I'm sure you can get it. It's a public domain film. It's going to be cheap. One of the few musicals you will find me recommending. But the point is, it had 2 transition shots that were done on location, and the rest was 4 sets. Now, the sets were beautiful, very intricate, and expertly made, and had just like some painting backgrounds behind the sets. But they were also very well done paintings. So, this was just over 2 hours of a very engaging story that was told just through good acting, good choreography, and 4 sets. So you don't have to go crazy with a whole bunch of different locations in your story. You can tell a really coherent story with just 4 locations if it's just got sufficient drama and character interaction in the story. And some of the sets can be really simple, like a room somewhere, someone's bedroom, or a foyer, or a study, or just a room that people do things in. And as long as the characters can have a dialogue and have drama in that space, you can tell a good story, even if you're limited from doing things like action scenes or fight scenes or things like that. And you can engage your audience with these characters. And so, if we're going to try and make our own cultural art, then I would encourage people who think about things like sets and action pieces and things like that to scale down, because if you can make the story engaging, like I'm young, I've been spoiled by modern film, but I genuinely enjoyed a musical from the late 40s. Or no,
Yeah, that's a very good point.
the mid 50s. Sorry, it's quite old. It's in the public domain.
But yeah, the book I'm writing at the moment has got quite a few different locations in it. So, but yeah, we mean I'm
Like
writing,
I encourage you. I encourage people who've got ideas like this to think a bit smaller, though, because you'll be surprised if you can have the drama in your head. You can put it in just a couple of rooms.
Well, it's like a action treasure hunt film. So it's like kind of the whole idea of the film is that it's like a trail of, like an adventure quest. So, but it's all set in America. So ideally, it could be filmed pretty easily on location. And there's no big budget like crazy fight scenes or anything in it. Anything can be accomplished with some blanks and some good firearms know-how. And it's all sorted. I'm a reenactor, so I play with lots of guns and explosions and things for. Well, sometimes we do mainly public shows, but we've been in a couple of films as well. So
Oh, I see.
it's easily achievable on a small scale.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like I just thought the idea would be great. All bears could work together and do all the different, parts of the projects. I'm, writing some. Other people can write things as well, and we could do all sorts. We could do songs and movies because we need good movies with no moral subversion in them. Good original
Yeah,
movies, rather than
that's
just
like
rebooting things. Make films like the films that people liked, rather than just remaking the film. Make a new film with the same kind of morals and the same kind of feelings and the same message.
actually that's a really good point.
Like.
And it makes me think of something. Hollywood is trying to cash in on nostalgia by making something that people remember liking. But what you're going for is making something timeless, right? Or going back to timeless sort of story structures.
That's the idea.
And while when you boil something down, it might be when you boil something down to its parts, it might be really similar. So, like a young man is called to adventure. He doesn't want to answer the call, but he ends up having to take responsibility, whatever, or some sort of tragedy drives him forward. He goes finds the thing, brings it back, saves the day, and when you boil it down, a lot of stories are like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's what mine is. To be fair, he gets dragged into the situation kind of unwillingly. And he's kind of a addicted gambler and alcoholic, and he just wastes all his money, and then he gets involved. He gets kidnapped by these guys, and they're trying to find out information about his granddad, and he has no idea what they're on about. So it sets in motion a chain of events.
Now that's something that would work as fish out of water kind of thing. Like if it's set in America, have someone who's not an American be the main character.
potentially could do.
Yeah, because as we've come to realize, there are quite a few cultural differences, even between very similar countries that have their roots in the same philosophy, such as
Yeah, that's very
differences between, say, Australia and Canada. You've got, one country full of awesome people and herpes-infected drop bears and giant spiders, and then you've got a frozen wasteland who has Kyle. And I can't think of any other positives. I kid. There's tons of great people in Canada, I'm sure, or just like Kyle, but
There's still quite a few in England as well, just not the majority, unfortunately.
well, the funny thing is the majority wanted Brexit, and I keep on seeing studies and polls and stuff. The public wants Brexit even more now. In fact, they want to Brexit harder than what the original idea was. And the most popular position is to just leave and tell the EU to come back when they feel like negotiating a proper deal.
That is our best option. World Trade Organization deal. Leave the EU. Don't pay them any more money. Don't let them have any more laws on us. And trade with the world.
Yeah.
We've already got countries lining up to trade with us. It's
Well,
going to be
not the least of which is the most productive economy in the world, who's come out and said, hey, how about just a completely tariff-free deal between the two of our great nations?
Mm-hmm.
It's like... And anyone who's in charge of a country would want to have a tariff-free deal with the United States, with our massive productive capacity, as well as a huge consumer market. I'm sure there are tons of British products besides butter and cheese that are really excellent from North Ireland. Yeah, Kerrygold, by the way, very good product.
Whiskey, Scotch whiskey.
Well, Scotch is too expensive for me. So,
well, if you could get it tariff free,
it would be much cheaper for sure.
Exactly.
And it's not just tariff free. The Scottish Parliament, which is its own thing, happens to think that anyone outside of Scotland who buys Scotch should pay a premium for it, which I don't understand. You'd think they'd want to just produce as much Scotch as possible and sell that and make the money that way, kind of like, we produce as many Fords as possible and make the money that way.
Yeah, it's small batch though, Scotch, so it's more about getting as much as they can for the small batches they can make. Most of the distilleries.
No, I understand, but that just means you need more distilleries, obviously.
True. But yeah, Bear Studios. I'm trying to think of a way people can easily get in contact with me. I've got it's the YouTube channel in the description or whatnot.
Yes, there is a link. By the way, Minuteman Bear is a musician and has a YouTube channel, the link to which is in the description. It's a bit late for me to be mentioning that, but of course. But I want to keep on talking about culture and art, so let's keep on talking about that.
Of course.
So this whole idea of making our own cultural artifacts, we've already got, not just in the Bears, just cultural conservatives in general. We've already got tons of people making visual art. You can go and commission artists to make a visual representation for you, and you can put it up in your house for around $40 for really excellent work. Yeah, and it's like on the cheap, and I think that probably for some of the things I've seen, you should be paying like $60-$70 at the very least. But it's like, if you have that kind of money on hand, I understand wanting to get something on the cheap, but the art market is really, really competitive. So Like visual artists, you're down pat. And if you've got the funds, then you can find someone who will make a comic book for you, for sure. And speaking of which, you've got Comicsgate as well as that one guy who did My Hero Macadamia and uh, Donald J. Thump. I forget what his company is called, but they've already got these sort of really entertaining books out there. I've heard that the Comicsgate books, Cyberfrog and Jawbreakers, are really good. So if you've got the cash to put down for those, it'd be a good idea to do that. So as far as stories, books, all that goes, we can do that already.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what you're talking about is a bit more ambitious.
A little bit, but I reckon it's doable.
You need a you got
The whole idea is non-PC films.
exactly. You need people who are like you and me, right? Who can tell a story.
Yeah.
And that's the beginning. Then you need people who can act out the story for you. Now, you or I might be able to do one part, but the more complex the story, the more characters there are, which means the more people you're going to need to competently portray that for you.
Mm-hmm.
And you got writer who can sometimes be a director, but you might need to bring in someone else to help you out, because especially if you're going to be in the story yourself. But that's basically what you need for a really basic play, and that limits who you can show it to. And the more ambitious you want to be, then you start bringing in set designers and sort of effects and all of that stuff. You're saying that the more complex you get, the more audience you want to reach, the more people you need on your team.
That's very true.
Right. And so
it's also very possible.
I agree. Like when you're doing something small, you can have a guy with lots of hats. I do know some people who can direct and act in sort of video for YouTube. It can work. Right? I've seen some people do it. It just means that you have to be able to sort of track everything inside your head while you're doing your lines and motions in the video, and know when to stop things if things didn't go the right way and redo the shot.
Yeah.
There are some things you can do with a tripod, so that one person who's in the shot can technically be the camera guy, but if you can have a cameraman, probably be better. And you need to have a really steady hand or the equipment to do it proper.
Yeah.
Which can be got fairly cheaply these days, I think. If you've... I think I've seen sort of steady cam setups for like $300, and when you consider how much they used to cost in the thousands of dollars, it's actually pretty cheap.
Yeah. And the thing is, it's going to be an all-bear project, so it's going to have to start off as a project, really, just people coming together and working on it. But if it goes well, and if we all enjoy it, we could work on making it into a profit organization.
Yeah, I agree. It's a really,
especially with the technology now, like we wouldn't even need cinemas. No one really goes to the cinema that much anymore. You can buy all your films and watch them on your TV. You can, like, when they come out in the cinema, you can pay like £10 and you get them in your living room.
Okay, so the reason why I really like talking to you about this is I really enjoy films, and you kind of scoot yourself to your right a little bit. You've moved. Yeah, there you go. Half your face was out of the shot.
Ah, okay. Is it good now?
Yeah, you're good now. So, I really enjoy film, and this is probably because when I was in, well, I've always been had my own pocket money from working for my father, but when I was in high school, I had a bit more mobility because I had some friends who could drive, and on the weekends, what we liked to do was go see whatever was new.
Mm.
And in my after high school, well, when I was in independent study, and then after high school, something that I like to do is go to the premiere of films that were um, exciting. Like the Marvel films were pretty big for us, and for my and I used to take my sister to those, as well as the Harry Potter movies and some of them. And I took my sister to the Hunger Game movies premieres as well, because she was really into those books. After I saw the movies, I read the books, and they had some neat ideas.
Mm.
But
The concept is rather cool, to be fair.
yeah. But honestly, the movies were actually better in this case. But probably because they hired a competent writer.
Mm.
I don't think I'd be a very good Uma Thurman, the last Moomin. My boobs are too small.
But yeah, it'd just be a volunteer project, and we can get bears that do it for work or do things for hobbies. And if they're really passionate about it and they want to get involved, because
Yeah,
that's all it takes. People that want to do it and want to get involved.
well,
And
it is how most things get started. Now, if you look at Comicsgate, right, what they had was something to show, start with, right? You have Richard C. Meyer, also known as your boy Zach, who already had an audience and already demonstrated through rigorous criticism of other people's works that he sort of understood how a story was supposed to be told. And he went to his audience and said, "Hey, I can run a team." And then he did, and he produced a comic book that people like. And then you've got Ethan Van Sciver, another big Comicsgate name, and what he had was a pretty good record of working at DC Comics, as well as his own property called Cyberfrog that he had not been pursuing because he was, of course, working for DC Comics. But then he comes out. He says, "Look, I've been kicked out of my industry because it's culturally hostile to people with my values. So, hello there, YouTube. I'm going to talk to you. Oh, and by the way, here's my idea for a comic book. Also, look at how good I can draw." And so they funded it. And so what we'd have to do is have our project, right? We'd have to have our talented, dedicated people make the thing, make the movie. And then we'd have to go to the audience and say, "Hey, in order to distribute this, in order to like, we've got these cuts, these bits of it we can show you, but we want to we would like to buy editing software to make all the scene transitions really smooth and not look like they were done in Windows Movie Maker. We would like to sort of do some color corrections so that it doesn't look like it was filmed over the 3 years it was filmed over, and it looks like it's a story that takes place over like the couple of months that we're telling you it does." We would like to buy a website domain so that we can put it online so that you can watch it. So we would like you to give us X amount of money that we think is what is going to be necessary to do all of that and turn a profit. And if you invest, then you get to access it for free, and then people after you can pay $5 to see it, and maybe we'll make a profit off of this. Is that what
That's
you
the
were kind
idea,
of?
basically, yeah. And it just takes passionate people to get involved. I'm it's my dream to move to the States. It's my dream to become an American citizen. So if we do make it into a business, then that's probably a good way of me doing that as well.
There are some things you can do. You can do trade work. Again, I know that you do reenacting over there, but like you could pick up welding or uh, plumbing or tiling or other
That's what I'm thinking of doing.
such things. There are people who, if you're energetic and dedicated, absolutely love to hire you over here. Plus, you speak English, which is actually a really big deal because a lot of people who do work don't speak English, and it's rather frustrating. So it is possible to come over if you have a skill, or even if you just want to pick up a skill.
Awesome.
Or you could
Sure.
or you could teach your dog to do a trick and then claim political asylum.
Yeah. So if there's any bears out there that wouldn't mind an apprentice, you can let me know.
You might get some. You might get some things in the hangout later.
But yeah, so Bear Studios obviously will probably work on the name, but if we can make it work, that'd be pretty awesome.
Yeah, I agree. And when it comes to when it comes to culture, like I don't know, we express what the culture is through art, and through that expression, then the culture will move in that direction. And if you've only got one pole, it just goes further and further in that direction, you know? And
Exactly.
like maybe it's fine for there to be like I call them lefty guys who just have the sort of emotional sort of pull toward equality, want to treat everyone fair, and they have that sort of a moray in how they view the world, and that's fine. Like it really is, it's fine. But you also need to recognize that there are people in the world who view it through this sort of I've earned this. And I've earned this because I've worked harder than you, or I've been smarter than you, or I took more chances than you. And you need to have the pull of no, this is okay for people to earn things. It's okay.
Good films with no
Yeah.
moral subversion and good moral stories in them.
Yeah, I agree. And we've actually managed to we've managed to talk for an hour, and I did neglect the chat. So guys, if you have any questions for the Filthy Lobster back, who I've graciously allowed to come over our deeply American stream,
Thank you kindly.
yes, please do so now so that I can relay them, because he is not looking at the chat either at this time because of technological reasons that may or may not involve a diesel engine. We're just waiting for the chat to catch up. If anyone has any questions for you?
Cool.
Yeah, and just see if the chat has any questions, and then we're going to call it a night. Oh, Boulder wants to know if Brexit will happen.
Hopefully. I think it's the 12th of April that we're leaving now. It's been extended. But hopefully it's World Trade Organization deal.
As I understand it, as I understand it, the hope is that one of the Eurosceptic sort of bloc countries, or several of them, just veto any attempt by Viktor Orban to give Theresa May another extension to try and get Parliament to accept a capitulation.
That is possible, I think, yeah.
Because as I understand it, Parliament went and ruled out every single option. They ruled out.
Yeah, they voted against no deal.
Yeah, they ruled out no deal. They ruled out May's treasonous capitulation, and they've ruled out and they've ruled out an extension. It's like
they've been ruling out second votes as well.
Yeah, so it's like,
which is good, obviously.
Well, yeah, but it's like they're asking for Theresa May to negotiate something properly in like 2 weeks, and Viktor Orban is like, well, no, she's already conceded everything. Why would I go back?
Terrible negotiation.
Yeah. Slav Weasel has no question at this time, Your Honor, and Sovereign Bear says that you are loved and not forgotten.
Oh, awesome.
I think that's out. That's everything. I don't do Florida Man on the interview shows, guys. So I'm sorry if you were looking forward to that. Look forward to the next Florida Man on Monday. B West loves you with blue hearts. And I am going to go ahead and say goodbye.
Awesome.
Yeah, have a great night. All right, so that was Minuteman. That was Minuteman Bear. He's, as you can tell, very sharp. And as we found out tonight, he is a musician. So please subscribe to his YouTube channel. Link in the description. Speaking of links, I think he said thank you to me and gotten loud noises. And please stop, Minuteman. Please stop. Sorry about that. Speaking of links, please, if you enjoyed the show, share links with your friends and enemies. And also, if you enjoyed the show, you can get more of it by subscribing and hitting the bell if you'd like the subscription to sometimes mean something, maybe. Possibly. Also, if you like content from yours truly, you can subscribe through the links in the description to various social media sites. The very best one is my Gap, where you get pictures of the ranch. And on Instagram, you get only pictures of the ranch. There is a Twitter handle who is run by someone who is definitely not me, in no way, shape, or form is connected to me other than he is in fact a fan of mine who is faithfully giving you guys links to the show and reminding you daily that socialism always ends in starvation and genocide. Please allow me to reiterate that the Twitter account is in fact not run by me. If you would like to support the show, you can follow the link labeled mug in the description to get your very own handsome mug. It is quite handsome, isn't it? The one that you can buy is, in fact, even more handsome because it has a logo on it twice, in the back and the front. This was, of course, a test run for me. I do like it. It is handsome, even though it is less handsome than the one that you can get. I believe that is everything. And so, I tell you, as always, have a great evening. And never forget that socialism always ends in starvation and genocide.